We're live in Senate Economic Development. We have Or Yang, Executive Director of the Vermont Human Rights Commission. In the witness chair, we have Senator Clarkson remote. And we're going to get started talking about S-103. Many of you might have the paper copy that still just has the kind of draft number on it. Do you want me to remind you what that is? Now it is Bill 103. But if you have it on paper, or now I have a whole stack of bills. Oh, actually, while we have you too, we are thinking about folding some provisions from S-23 into our bill, which Senator Hardy introduced, and it prohibits discrimination and harassment based on hair types and styles and on the basis of weight.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to hear some witnesses if you want
Okay.
to add that to your,
Sure.
Limited. 20, can you say that louder? Right?
The draft was 23-0110.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And it's 16 pages, because I know that helps some people too.
Three.
So, and it is posted as 103 probably now. So we're looking at 103, and then if you have any comment on S-23. Thank you so much.
0110.
Yes.
And the what's posted is the same as the draft.
It absolutely, yeah, it was just,
Okay.
it was already on its way to the floor for a number by that
Now, I forgot to check your calendar. How much time do I have this one?
time. Now 25
Okay.
minutes.
Okay.
We lost
So, all right, let's go. So S-103. So Or Yang, Executive Director, Legal Counsel for the Vermont Human Rights Commission, for the record. And I will be talking about S-103 today, which is a very large comprehensive bill around workers' rights. And I'm going to talk about three primary things. The first thing is what I call the don't darken my door stuff that's contained in the bill, amending the equal pay laws in the bill, and then looking at harassment in places of public accommodations and workplaces differently. And I'll start with the easier one, which is the don't darken my door stuff. So the intent and purpose of this bill is that it would prohibit employers from including clauses in settlement agreements once an employee has filed a discrimination claim that says you could never work for us ever again. Basically, it's don't ever darken my door because you filed a complaint of discrimination. And the problem with that is that we know that employers are using that as a negotiation tool. We know that and that tool is being used, unfortunately, to get rid of people who have meritorious claims of discrimination and people who have a record of being a great employee. And when you have a large employer, especially like the state of Vermont, that employs over 8,000 employees, that's really significant to say you can never work here again, because that essentially forces them to leave the state. In 2018, the legislature already passed similar language around sex harassment. It already says that when mostly women who file claims of sexual harassment, we will not allow employers to punish them by including these clauses in the settlement agreements. That law passed unanimously in the Senate, and it passed in the House. I forgot what the count was. It was pretty unanimous as well. That bill then was, a similar bill was reintroduced in 2019 and 2020, I want to say. And it was now to use the same language, but say, if we're protecting women who bring claims of sex discrimination, why aren't we protecting other groups, people who bring race discrimination claims, disability discrimination claims? We should be doing the same thing. This committee passed that bill. It went to the House, and then COVID happened in 2020, and all priority bills became COVID related. So it died in the House. That bill was then reintroduced in the House the following legislative session, and it passed there, came here last year, and it got out of committee, and it got a second reading, and then it died before you adjourned. So to me, this is the easiest ask. It has been long debated. Any sort of opposition that, or arguments that was originally raised as to it, we know since 2018, those arguments have not come to fruition, meaning those are not valid arguments. The arguments that, maybe we're gonna have more litigation if we don't allow employers to use this tool. Well, that's not true, and that hasn't been shown to be true when it comes to sex discrimination. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. And again, I see this as an easy pass. We have to stop punishing people who bring claims of discrimination forward. If we protect women, we have to protect other classes as well. The second thing that S103 does is it seeks to amend our equal pay laws and to include not just sex, but also race, as well as mental and physical conditions or impairments, which is disability, as well as I think we have here, I want to say race, color, national origin as well. And why is it important that our equal pay laws cover other protected class? Other than the obvious answer is if we're protecting women in the workplace around wage discrepancy issues, there's no reason why we shouldn't be protecting other protected classes of people. It is absolutely not true that women experience wage discrimination at a different or higher or more significant rate than any other protected class. But the reason why equal pay claims are important is because they don't require that the employee show intentional discrimination. So when a woman says, she can point to a man in the workplace, the same role, responsibility, and says he's making more money than me. She has two claims. She has a sex discrimination claim and she has an equal pay claim. And the sex discrimination claim requires that she show the hiring manager had intentional discrimination, but the equal pay claim does not. If the equal pay claim is designed to address systemic wage discrepancy issues. And that's why it's important that we include other protected classes in the equal pay laws. Also, right now, if a Black woman in the workplace is able to point to her colleague who is a white woman and they're doing the same job, but they're getting paid differently, the white woman is making significantly more, she does not have an equal pay claim currently. So adding other protected classes to the equal pay laws is really about honoring and recognizing that women belong in different protected classes of people. And there's a lot of data and statistics out there tell us that women of color, women with disabilities make less money in the workplace than any other type of counterpart. Okay. And I'm wondering if we should stop for questions on those two before I move to harassment, or if you're okay with me moving forward.
I hope pause this for questions if someone raises their hand.
Question, in the event that there is a claim brought, say an equal pay claim, what is there a defense
Yes.
potentially? What would the defense be?
Yeah. So let's say a woman says, "Here's my male colleague. He's making a lot more money than I am, and we're doing the same job." It doesn't make sense. And the employer has defenses that are already in the statute, which says, "I pay people differently because of merit." And we know that, so they can do that. They can raise that the pay is based on merit, like what you produce, right? It can be based on seniority. And also a bona fide business legitimate reason. And so if an employer is able to justify that in good faith, they have a policy as to why they're paying people differently, that gives them the out.
So theoretically, if someone were to document through performance evaluations over time that employee A does a better job than employee B, that would be presumably a satisfactory justification?
If pay is connected to merit, yes. If an employer says the reason why so-and-so gets paid more is because they have performed well, and we have this policy that says higher performance gets this, and that is true often with raises. That is not necessarily true with your base pay, but it is true that with raises, it is based often conditioned on merit. So yes.
But in terms of people coming into the workforce based on prior work history that they bring with them, I would assume that would be a valid basis, wouldn't it? In other words, I'm hiring someone who's got 5 years of experience as opposed to someone who has 2 years of experience. The person with 5 years
Right, right.
Well recommended by prior, would presumably be okay to pay that person differently.
I would say that so I'm gonna have two answers to that. The first answer is that probably would qualify under a bona fide legitimate reason to pay people differently because they come to the workplace with different years of experience. In a practical sense, what we do know is that sometimes those years of experiences don't actually result in better performance. And then you have someone who comes in with 5 years versus 20 years, and they're actually performing much better than the person with 20 years, and the person with 20 years is getting more money. And then that causes employees to be upset, but it also raises the question of, should we be looking at what people previously made or those years of experience? And so I don't want to say yes or no to that answer. It's a little bit more complicated than that because it really depends, right? Sometimes years of experience matters, and sometimes it is what's contained in the experience, not the years that matters.
Well, I guess one of my questions that I'm going to ultimately is are these kinds of determinations becoming quite subjective in terms of the board or the investigator, or whoever from the Human Rights Commission that's looking at them and imposing your judgment as to the quality of an employee over the employers who is responsible for managing that employee?
At the state of Vermont, so we enforce the anti-discrimination law, the Fair Employment Practices Act, only as to state agencies and departments. And other than like some wage raises, which are capped too, that pay here at the state of Vermont is not usually conditioned on merit. Yes, and so what happens is that usually people who are performing really well get promoted. They might get a raise. People who are not performing well get the same base rate, but they're getting a disciplinary plan or work. So it isn't so much as I'm making more because I'm doing better than you are. And it is very, as you said, if Vermont was paying employees based on a subjective viewpoint of how well people were doing, which is not the case, but if they were, you're right, it would be difficult to go in and say, well, your supervisor's subjective view of how someone is performing is not like what I think. It would be hard for us to investigate such a case, and we don't. We really look at.
This statute, though, is applied, is looking forward to statewide use as opposed to just employees.
Yes.
So you're now going into the private sector where the situation is much different than a civil service environment that you have with the state of Vermont. And so that really is more my question is, do you have the potential for engaging in, some very subjective judgments? I'm wondering, are there guidelines? Are there, how do you make that determination if the employer has a good faith say, this is a better employee than that one?
I just want to pause us to make sure I'm understanding correctly that sex and gender are already in here. So we're kind of still basing it off of what we might have already seen about gender equal pay. So we can use that as a guide.
Okay, but I mean, the overall question though is kind of the overall question.
Right. Your question is just about the equal pay laws in general.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure we know there's already one in place.
Yes. I would say that if a plaintiff only had a subjective evidence, it would be hard for a plaintiff to prevail. What usually happens is the plaintiff says, I have just as many projects, I am supervising just as many employees, and even in the private sector, and I don't understand, I'm getting good remarks. I don't understand why I'm not getting paid the same as my male counterpart. That's often what happens, and that's what supports the claim in the first place. If they were going, I think I'm doing well, but my supervisor is giving me bad marks, and that person is getting paid more than me, that individual most likely is not bringing an equal pay claim forward. If they did, it would be easy to defeat that if an employer were to be able to show that I pay based on merit, I pay based on how well you finish your projects, how quickly you finish your projects. Even an employer would be able to quantify that, and it is rare. And in fact, we should stay away from subjective reviews of how employees do. And even when I'm doing trainings for employers, I say you shouldn't rely on your gut as to who's doing good or not. You should really be using objective standards, and they know that, and they are moving towards that. Very few are still just looking at, like, going off their gut who's doing well. But it would be difficult, if not impossible, to test, and courts would be very reluctant to test an employer's subjective viewpoint on how well people are doing. Oftentimes merit pays, and that's in fact where it's in that subjective viewpoint, by the way, is where implicit bias and discrimination often exists. And so we do want to encourage employers not to use their subjective beliefs about how they evaluate employees.
Now, does this apply to all employers, or is there a size applicability?
This SO 103 and our statute would be applicable to all employers, but the federal EEOC limits that to, I think, like 30 employees, larger employer, medium to larger employees.
Yeah, but there's no cutoff in the Vermont statute.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't believe so, yeah.
Senator Cummings.
Situation I know of. Getting employees is now difficult. And one situation, they were actually having to offer new employees more money than people that had been there a while, because they needed the employees. But if they raised everybody to the same level, they'd be out of business. How do we deal with that? There's a woman that's been there for 3 years. She is making the same as a new hire or less than. How and that's not unusual right now. How do we deal with that?
If they are working the same job and have the same responsibilities, then the question is, for us and all of us, is what's more important? The fact that these two people of different sex should be making the same money, or the bottom line for the employer? And that is a hard balance for you,
Well,
not for me, because I think that if they're doing the same role and they're the same job, they should be paid the same. And there are so many reasons why. It's always the bottom line. It's always money as to why we don't pay women more or people of color more. My
This
position.
isn't women or people of color. This is new hires.
Right.
The market causes me, and we always assume that this is a public institution. They aren't for profit. They would go out of business if they had to immediately bring everybody up to the same level. And it's not discrimination based on any category. It's when you were hired and what the market requires when you were hired. And I just wonder, I mean, what's happening is the old employees are leaving. But it's not discrimination, but they could find themselves in a very expensive lawsuit and end up being out of work, which would unemploy probably hundreds of people right now. How do we balance? I mean,
First, I think I want to first address the idea that you have to bring everybody up just because you hire somebody at a higher rate. This is only about protected classes of people who we know historically have been paid less than any other group of
but
people.
women are half population.
Right.
more.
But that already exists, and we
Yes,
haven't
but
seen a
you've
huge
got
lawsuit.
A
right?
woman that's been there 3 years,
Mhm.
they hire 2 men and pay them the same, not because they're men. They'd hire a woman and pay the same. It's because that's what it takes to get an employee now.
Right, I understand that. And so when you said they had to bring everybody up, I just wanted to clarify, we're only talking about protected classes of people and
That's
rate.
women, that's half the
Right.
workforce.
So then if we're talking about sex and we're talking about women and making sure that women are being paid the same as men, then that is what the equal pay law here but that is already the
Mhm.
existing law.
So-
But
What I've just heard, though, if I've heard this correctly, is in the situation that Senator Cummings mentioned, you have people who are already here and people who are new.
Yeah.
People who are new are getting paid at a higher rate because of a bona fide business need,
Mhm.
based on the economy.
Mhm.
Does that mean that in order to prevent an equal pay claim, the women at the lower level have to be brought up? And then my question is, well, do the men at the lower level have to be brought up too, or have you discriminated against them?
They're not a protected class.
I want to
That's-
just let the witness answer
Yeah,
the
so-
question and not-
Hold on, sex is a protected class,
Right.
period. So men are a protected class.
Mhm.
Just like race includes the white race,
Right.
and gender identity includes cisgender folks as well. So sex includes both. And I want to go back to the definition of discrimination. There's individual intentional discrimination, and then there is systemic discrimination. And this is seeking to address systemic discrimination in wage. So you're right, you have an employer who's making a business decision about needing to hire people and to be attractive to hire people. But he or she or they don't have any intent to discriminate. It's still potentially systemic discrimination that we need to address in terms of how people are paid. Now, the question then is, when an employer is trying to pay new people more money so as to be more attractive, does that qualify as a legitimate bona fide business reason? Possibly. We don't have a court case that has answered that, but it's possible that that would be the out for the employer. Do I personally think that should be the out? No. And do I think businesses are going out of business because they're paying a few women more money to match? We're not talking about hiring. By the way, if we were hiring men at $20,000 more than their female colleagues, and therefore we're bringing all these women up 20 each, yeah, could you go out of business? Sure, but why are you paying men $20,000 more to do the same job as those women in the workplace? It's often the case that they're getting paid maybe 5 to 6 more, and you can bring those women up to that same level without actually causing any issues for your bottom line. You're not going out of business because of that.
But this is just new and old. Whether it's male, female, whatever,
Yeah.
it's the market. You can't open your restaurant if you don't have a dishwasher.
Right.
All right? But there's a limit to how much you can pay.
So I do think the point's been made. There is one more piece that I want to, we can return to this particular topic, but while Boar's in the witness chair, she does have one more piece to address. And I think the point's been made, new and old, does seem to be different unless you're looking at a pattern around identity.
The only thing I would add is our equal pay laws have been in existence for women for years, and it
Right.
hasn't put businesses out of
Exactly.
business.
Yeah.
It hasn't.
Good point.
And so this concern that the bottom line for businesses is going to be hurt, which is the argument that is always made by
Mhm.
employers, it does not bear true.
That is not the argument I'm making, and that's the problem I have. If I have any questions, I am now,
I didn't think you were making that argument.
I wasn't,
Yeah,
and I don't
yeah.
like having judgment passed on me because I have a question about,
I'm not
I
judging
don't
you.
think, so we're.
I don't know who's judging you, but I'm not.
I get the decided feeling that my question is.
I think we have just a few minutes left with 4, and I wanted to make sure she could address the last piece. And then we can revisit this. We can have 4 back in the witness chair. We can have other witnesses. But I want to make sure everybody hears all of the pieces that 4 wants to comment on before we revisit where we need more testimony. That's all.
I appreciate all the questions.
Yeah.
This is complicated and hard. It's not meant to be easy. This is
Right.
why you have the hard job of balancing employer and employee
Mhm.
needs. Um,
I'm sorry, I'll just say, if we wanted to look at how the equal pay law is working right now around gender to help answer your question, we can do that. I just am hearing it and I'm
No, see,
feeling like.
that's it. It has nothing to do with gender or race,
Mhm.
but it gets put into, I don't have questions about gender discrimination. It's just, there's no class here, but one group is getting paid less than another group for a reason. It could be interpreted as gender discrimination or anything else if there is a member of a protected class in any of those. That I'm not questioning whether or not there is gender discrimination.
Okay,
All right, and I am not questioning whether or not we should do something about it. I'm questioning how this works when there are other reasons going on. And right now in this economy with the worker shortage, it's going on.
mhm,
And I can see the potential for some
Right.
harm
so I was, yeah.
good organizations.
Yeah, so the only case study we could look at is the existing gender-based equal pay law to see if that is impacting the question about market forces right now. That's what, I'm not saying you're promoting gender discrimination in any way, but the question is how do we get the answer that you're looking for?
Yeah, how do we allow for legitimate
Mhm.
differences?
The law allows that, and that's what Senator Brock had
Right,
asked.
that's really
The law
what I'm
already
asking.
allows that.
And I'm asking, also in terms of taking testimony, who
Mhm.
who would oppose this? And what would the reasons be? Would one of the reasons potentially be the degree of subjectivity that may be involved as opposed to clear cut something that, I'm doing this and I'm following the rules or I'm not, but it seems that so much becomes very, very judgmental. And that's the thing that concerns me.
So the chamber wants to come in to speak to a lot of these bills.
Yeah.
Informally, my understanding, and I don't want to, apologies if I'm misrepresenting, that they didn't have an issue with this section. You can certainly
I
ask
can't
them
imagine.
questions,
That they would.
but this,
Yeah.
they have other things they want to come complain about for sure.
I don't know anybody who's going to have
Yeah,
a problem about gender discrimination. If
Right.
it's gender discrimination. I think people are going to have a question just regarding, are there bona fide business reasons for making pay decisions regarding individual employees? And how does that stack up against a presumption based on the numbers alone without any depth behind them? That
Yeah.
really is my concern.
Yeah, and I think these are great questions because these are questions that go to the heart of what equal pay laws are in general. The S-103 is about adding protected classes to that.
Yeah.
And because we've had equal pay laws in place already for years, I can't imagine that the people that originally opposed it, who raised these questions, by the way, around business needs and so forth, would today then go, well, don't add race or national origin or disability to the list of protected classes, because it's gonna be more, I
But
can't
again, there
imagine
would
that they
be,
would.
though, not the same issues regarding business necessity or business reasons that are bona fide. There will be new ones in each case. For
Right.
example, let's say Black new Americans
Right,
may be paid less in some places, but the employer may say, well, the reason I'm doing it is because the communication skills and language barriers are such that are, impending. It's difficult to communicate, some argument like that. Is that a bona fide argument? And how do you determine whether it's a bona fide argument? How do you evaluate it?
it's up to our courts to make that decision, and we have left it up to our courts, and they've done a
Well,
decent
to
job.
get to the court, it's gotta go through you beforehand. You do some.
It doesn't have to go through me, that's the good.
Well,
It
does it
does-
go through the Human Rights Commission?
And people
do
have
some
a
investigation?
choice. People have the choice to come to the Human Rights Commission if they work for a state agency or department. They can go to the EEOC, they can, yes, and if they work for a private employer, they go to the Attorney General's office. But, we
I'm just
would,
wondering how those things are handled by these various agencies. I just want to get an understanding of where does the subjectivity end and what becomes an objective measure for employers to follow that
Perhaps.
gives them a safe harbor.
so perhaps what we can look at a different time is a case, or bring in, I can work with Executive Director Yang on somebody who can speak to what constitutes the kind of pattern that
I
has been
think though it's not
elevated to
a
court.
case. I think it's broader than that, because we're not talking about a case. We're talking about, the pattern of how this kind of situation, what's the process? What are the factors for evaluation? How do you make that decision? And
We
that's
are-
really very
right.
soft to me, right?
We are overtime, so I think we'll just have to figure out which witnesses would help satisfy these questions, and we can work with the director on that. I do want to let you speak to the last piece, and at some point, we're going to get interrupted by a pediatrician who has a limited window of time.
Okay. And the last piece, unfortunately, is the hardest piece, but I'm happy to come back and, yeah.
Great, great.
I'm happy to come back and talk about all of this because these are great questions. And I almost find that these are not questions about S-103, but really about our equal pay laws in general and the process and legitimate business reasons. And we have a case study at the HRC that I'd love to share with you about that as well. But okay, so the last piece of it, S-103, seeks to correct a legal standard around harassment and how harassment is used. And I want to give you a little bit of history and context so you understand where S-103 is coming from. So harassment as a form of discrimination is a legal theory that came from case law, not statute. And it was widely adopted after a 1986 US Supreme Court case called Meritor Savings Bank versus Vincent. This was a plaintiff, Michelle Vincent. She was an African-American woman. She had survived extreme sexual harassment at the hands of her supervisor. We're talking for a 4-year period. We're talking about 40 to 50 instances of rape, groping, demands for sexual favors, this supervisor following her around, exposing himself. And the first time the US Supreme Court says, this is so bad that this has to be a form of discrimination. This hostile work environment has to be included in our sex discrimination laws. It's harassment. And the court articulated a legal standard in that case. And they said that for harassment to be actionable, it has to be severe or pervasive. Severe or pervasive. But what the US Supreme Court did not do, and they're notorious for doing this, is they did not articulate how bad behavior had to be to meet that requirement for severe or pervasive. In this case, it was 40 to 50 instances of rape. Is one rape sufficient to be severe? And the court did not articulate how long bad behavior had to occur for it to be pervasive. And so you have courts throughout the country trying to grapple with what does severe or pervasive mean. And even in Vermont, the Vermont Supreme Court postured at one point that a student who had been raped could not meet the standard because they misread and misunderstood it to be severe and pervasive. They said, well, rape is severe, but is it pervasive? It only happened one time. And they were wrong about that. That's since been corrected in terms of like that misunderstanding. But courts throughout the country have read severe and pervasive to be such a high bar that women are losing their claims of sex harassment, women who have been subjected to hostile work environment. In the Fifth Circuit, Sonia Barnett lost her case when her supervisor touched her sexually inappropriately, intimidated her, stalked her. The court said, well, yeah, those are really bad, but it didn't destroy her ability to succeed in the workplace.
So our pediatrician witnesses here, and
Okay.
I'm thinking we just need to have you return.
Okay,
We'll work on getting another witness who can speak to pattern and practice when these things come up around equal pay. But we'll have to continue this.
I think the Commission on Women would be good to talk
Okay.
about the existence of
Okay.
equal pay for women as it has been in place for many, many years.
Thanks
And
so
so,
much.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry.
There was a
but-
lot to
I know.
cover here, and I'm happy to come back anytime,
Yes.
really.
And,
Thank you.
and if you want, if you want to send us an email or a memo or something,
I can
but,
send
but you don't need to, if you
Yeah.
want to.
whatever
It's
works for
good
you.
with memos
Yes.
and things.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Is it Dr. Pharisee? I don't want to mispronounce it.
Hey, good morning. Yes, that is correct. My name is Ellie Pharisee. Nice to see you.
So we're switching topics now to tobacco penalties and prohibitions. And Dr. Pharisee was connected to us through the Vermont Medical Society to speak to this issue from the perspective of a pediatrician.
Great. Yeah, thank you for having me and thanks for accommodating me coming by Zoom and in the middle of patients. I was asked to come in and speak with this committee about what pediatricians are seeing with respect to nicotine use and dependence in youth as you consider removing tobacco penalties from this bill on S19. So I'm a pediatrician who specializes in caring for kids with breathing issues. So I'm a pulmonologist. So discussions around tobacco use are really common for me to have with both parents of kids who might be smoking and exposing their kids to secondhand or thirdhand smoke, and then also with adolescents who might be using nicotine-containing products that are harming their lungs. So I definitely see harm from these products in my patients in a lot of different ways. But one thing that pediatricians are definitely seeing a lot of is rising nicotine dependence in teenagers. And this is increasing, and it's really driven right now by youth vaping. So these are nicotine containing products, and that's where I'm going to focus my comments. But I understand that tobacco products include combustible cigarettes, and then also there is a rising use of what's called like oral nicotine pouches and things that are not inhaled but continue to have a risk of addiction for young people. So e-cigarettes really were designed as an intended cessation tool, but that's really not what we have seen in the way that they've been marketed or used. So when Juul took over the market in 2015, they developed products that had really high levels of nicotine that could be delivered to bodies without the irritation that's seen in combustible tobacco. So these products were then heavily marketed toward youth, and they used a lot of colorful advertising with ads of young, healthy, attractive people using these products. Their design is really interesting to kids because it's sleek. Often they have a tech component to them, and they can be used in really stealthy ways that are different from combustible tobacco products. So they're easy to share with each other, so they can pass it in the hallway. They can be used without creating a lot of smell or identifying characteristics. And so we're just seeing a lot more use because of the way that these products can be delivered. So it's important. Like, one thing I'm just noticing is that young people are just awash in e-cigarettes specifically. Like, they see it everywhere. It's all over their schools. It's all through their social media feeds. And this is also kind of a pivot in the way tobacco industry has used hooks to try to target people through social media. They hire influencers, and then it shows up in people's algorithms. So people see it everywhere online. And then as the tobacco industry has taken over more of the e-cigarette industry, they're focusing more on retail outlets as well. So the ads are in corner stores, they're in places where you can buy tobacco products. So advertising is everywhere. This definitely does influence youth. There are also parts of the design that emphasize the social aspect of it, which is also appealing to youth. So they have like party tricks, which are light shows that signal at parties to other people that you're using and promote social spread of this use. So flavors are also a really big hook for young people. So there's a lot of different aspects that industries are using to try to hook youth, which makes sense because that is where lifelong users are created. It's in the industry's interest to do that. But the culmination of this is that pediatricians are then seeing all of these nicotine dependent kids, and schools are dealing with this as well. So I have at least a handful of kids every week who I see who are dependent on this. One 18-year-old that I met earlier this week started vaping at age 13 and said, I didn't know what I was doing. Someone passed me something and told me that it tasted like fruit punch, and that sounded good to me. And so it made me feel good. I didn't know that it had nicotine in it, and I just knew that I wanted to do it again. So then this person continued vaping for the next several years and has made a couple of attempts to quit, but they can't tolerate the emotional swings that come from nicotine withdrawal. So they also said, quote, I feel like I've lost a lot of control over my life because I can't do anything without having a vape on me. So this is a kid who uses a flavored nicotine product within 5 minutes of waking up in the morning, and then vapes all day. And it's the last thing they do before they fall asleep at night. This is also a kid who has months of coughing every time they get sick, and they want to quit and they can't because of this dependence. And that's the definition of addiction, that you can't stop using something and you revolve your life around it, even though it has negative consequences for you. So pediatricians really want to make nicotine and tobacco containing products unavailable and unappealing to youth. And we also want young people to feel like they can get support from their schools and from their pediatricians if they're struggling with a nicotine addiction. And young people are less likely to seek this out if there's fear of punishment from that. Part of my work in the state has been also around connecting schools with medical homes and pediatric providers to try to link them for identifying students who are nicotine dependent to kind of get them more medical support if it's appropriate for them to have nicotine replacement therapy or address mental health needs. And across the board, what school nurses and SAPs in schools and pediatricians recognize that this is a really pervasive issue, the issue of youth nicotine use and dependence. It's a growing problem, and there's a need for different interventions around it. So many schools have been operating with a lot of their older policies that lump this into tobacco use that is mostly punitive. And what that looks like is that a student might be suspended from school because they have recurrent e-cigarette use. And what we've seen is that this doesn't achieve what we think it's going to achieve. It doesn't do what we want it to. It basically ends up disengaging this young person from their school and their community, and it distances them further from adults who can help them. So that also ignores the potential that this youth has an untreated mental health issue or concerns around nicotine dependence that actually are driving their use and need more support from counselors and physicians. So some schools will also call the police if this happens because that's part of their policy. So then the young person has an encounter with law enforcement, which research also shows then reduces that student's functioning in school once they have that kind of an encounter. And there's definitely concern about how equitably punitive policies are enforced for various types of students who are found in possession of tobacco products. So I encourage this committee to focus on whether punitive policies actually achieve what we want them to achieve and consider focusing on other areas that might limit youth interest and access to tobacco products, and including considering the role of tobacco industry in influencing that and what the retailer's responsibility is as well. I'll take questions if you have them.
Thanks, Dr. Darcy. Senator Clarkson.
Thank you. That was terrific. We've been dealing with this issue for a while. It's sadly nothing new to this committee. And the question I have for you, Dr. Faraci, is what effective strategies would you employ? I mean, we're looking at getting rid of penalties that don't seem to have too much impact. What measures to reduce and not, what measures would you suggest?
Great question. So I think that there has been a huge lack of education around what the risks are with vaping. Like students who are starting to use them don't know what they're doing and they underestimate the health consequences of that. I think there's a role for additional education in schools around that, starting pretty early. We did a great job with tobacco products. So now that, teenagers are like, oh, I would never smoke a cigarette. That's disgusting. But that's not happening with vape products. I think I am very much in favor of comprehensive flavor restrictions in tobacco. I know that that's also being taken up by the Senate this year. That reduces the appeal quite a bit because it's not mango punch ice that people can take. And it's just that if tobacco is the only flavor, it is less appealing to young people. Sorry, what's my other thought about that? I am definitely in favor of coming up with innovative ways to actually just phase out tobacco products in general. So the use, and then the enforcement of existing laws is also really critical. Like this bill, the S19 bans online sales, and I know that young people are getting things from online. So I have been in touch with the Attorney General's office about this enforcement, and I have not heard back. So I do think that enforcement of existing, that's big. Like if people are able to just go online and get a bunch of these and get around the age restrictions, and then they're coming to Vermont and they shouldn't come to Vermont through any sort of mail order, and they are. So that is an area that I think deserves some attention. That's not really there's nothing that needs to be changed in the bill here that's already in there, So those are some areas that I think enforcing those with the responsibility of the retailers and the regulations that exist are pretty critical. I've never heard a child or a young person tell me that they want to quit because they might get in trouble with the police. Like that's never been something that has been brought up to me. it's usually around the way it makes them feel, that they just want to have more control over their life. They tend to be more personal reasons rather than extrinsic kind of like forces, being like, my parents said I had to quit. Like that doesn't work. That's not usually what gets people going. Adults have told me the cost for cigarettes has been a big driver for them in quitting. They might say, I had to get a new car and my car payment is too much and I can't keep smoking when I have these other bills. So I think
Senator
taxation
Harris.
does help. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is hugely helpful and discouraging. Have you found any peer-to-peer training or work where older teens talk to younger teens? And do you have any suggestions on how the state could use social media to talk about how vaping isn't cool the way cigarettes aren't cool, and put vapes in the same category as cigarettes somehow?
Ooh, great question. That is a really, the fact that people don't consider them smokers is a really big part of why this has been challenging. People really separate it from cigarettes and do not consider themselves smokers. There are enough differences with how it's used and the negative associations with it that I think that's hard to undo. Like one of the big drawbacks for adolescents who are very image conscious is that cigarettes are smelly. It's gonna, make you smell bad, your teeth turn yellow, and those things don't happen with vapes. It's like, oh, you smell like grape and that's nice, So those things are really challenging to conflate with that. I tend to find in talking to people more about their own autonomy and not letting substances hack into their brain, like trying to actually do individual work with youth around that, with what the angle is about why you don't smoke. Because with tobacco, it's like lung cancer. That was one of the big deterrents. And that we don't know with e-cigarettes if that's the case. I'm sure it causes lung disease in the long term, but we just don't have the data around it. And people often assume that because we don't have that, it's just safer, which is an incomplete assumption to make. But I do think that trying to focus on different ways they resonate differently with different people. Some pediatricians in the Northeast Kingdom have told me that they have a lot of adults with COPD that are in their community. And so tying that to young people about like, this actually is something that can link to that has resonated with some of those young people. So, and then I think the connection with other addictions is real. Like that nicotine use in adolescence does prime the brain to learn to seek relief or reward or pleasure through substances in a way that isn't really achievable without putting something into your body. And by doing that over and over, as your brain is in this critical developing period, it does prime the brain for other addictions. And our state, unfortunately, has a lot of experience with that. Like people have connections with folks who've had really significant opiate addictions that have killed them. Nicotine is not an addiction that is going to kill you in the short term with an overdose. Like that's not the same type of thing. But I do think linking it to just the concept of addiction is something that does resonate with young people who see it in their communities or their families. I'm sorry, you had another question. About peer-to-peer things. So that I think has a lot of legs. Like I think there's some real possibility that schools can do that. And some of the schools that I've worked with, specifically the Milton School District, has started trying to do some more education-based modules that are like when a student is caught with tobacco products, they do this. It's through Stanford. They have a really nice kind of self-guided type of module around vaping and e-cigarette use that people have found really helpful. And anecdotally, they're having some more success with that, just as far as engagement goes, but they just started that maybe this fall. So it's not a long-standing thing yet that we know how effective it is. And there are places not in Vermont that I know of who do have programs where older youth who have been like, who had to learn these things will go do sessions with, middle schoolers or do that kind of near peer kind of, I don't want to call it mentorship, but like education around these issues that I think has some potential to have an impact. I haven't seen it done here yet, but I think that has some potential. I think there's not education in schools. People don't know what is going on, but they know it's a problem, but people don't know what these products are.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Farisi? Well, I mean, know you're between patients and, you know, you're taking care of our young people. So we really appreciate you making time for this and for the work you do.
Thank you for the invitation, and please feel free to reach out with other questions that come up, okay? All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
And Dr. Farisi came to us through Jill, so we can always get back in touch with her too.
I am totally confused,
Okay.
but I spent the last 6 years on health and welfare.
Mhm.
I thought we had outlawed vapes for anyone under 21.
I feel like Tina has 5
Yeah,
minutes.
we had
You
outlawed.
could ask her,
Yes.
yeah. Can you
And
get?
I just wonder what happened. We outlawed
Right.
unicorn poop as a flavor. It was very popular.
Okay.
So I can,
Yeah.
But it was.
Tina is the Government Relations Director for the American Heart Association. So to answer your question, we have not outlawed flavors. Flavors are still available to buy. We did make it illegal for anyone under 21 to be able to purchase it. The law actually says the illegality is more in the sale to people under 21, but the flavors are still out there. And we did pass a law that prevented online sales. Unfortunately, there's a lot of ways to get around it, and the tobacco industry finds lots of ways to market their product, including the peer-to-peer. The kids are, you know, gee, I got a great deal on however they chat. I'm not hip, so I don't know whether it's Instagram or what have you. That's how they find out the better deals on these products. So they are getting them. In answer to one of the things that Dr. Farisi said, the health department, the Department of Liquor and Lottery, and the Attorney General's office do work really well closely together to try to prevent these sales. So much so that the health department granted DLL some funding to work on this issue. They found kind of the bad guys that were selling in Vermont. The Attorney General's office enforced it as well. And last I knew, and it's probably even higher than this, we've gotten over $800,000 in fines from companies who are illegally selling online to kids. So we're trying. Another big thing is it's pretty easy to say that you're old enough online and buy them. It's pretty easy to get a fake ID. And so that's some of the things that we're combating. There's always something that's coming down the pipe to make it easier for kids, unfortunately, to get these products. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but
Why didn't we outlaw flavors?
I don't know. We would like you to do so.
And that's a bill in.
Yes, so S18 actually would eliminate the sale of flavored and menthol tobacco. Just quick history, menthol cigarettes are the only flavored cigarettes still on the market, and flavored, obviously, vaping products are still available in flavored cigars. And so we would like those to be eliminated. I'll talk about it a little bit during my testimony, but that is the huge lure to kids, is the flavors. As Dr. Farisi said, with smoking tobacco, everyone's like, oh, the smoke is gross, it lingers. With vaping products, what you smell is fruity bubblegum, whatever, you actually smell the flavor, which makes it kind of extra attractive on top of the taste of it. So jumping back to this legislation, I just wanted to let you know the American Heart Association, along with our partners in the Coalition for Tobacco-Free Vermont, support S19 and ask you to pass it. Just to give you some quick background on who that coalition is, it's very respected public health organizations. Many of you probably know all of these. The American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, the Vermont Medical Society, the American Lung Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, the Academy of Family Physicians, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and lots of community coalitions across the state. We're asking you to pass this bill and lift the penalties on youth, not because we want them to use tobacco, but we want them to more easily be able to quit, as you heard from Dr. Farisi. You've heard that law enforcement is not actually using these laws, but kids believe that they are. That means that kids are not getting the counseling and the help that they need for addiction. The question isn't about removing a punishment for kids who are vaping. It's about removing a barrier for kids who need help. That's what this is about. And what are we going to do to help our kids break addiction?
Senator Cummings, are you available to take questions?
Sure.
I think, is Joyce coming on Zoom or in person?
She's gonna be running the late too.
Oh, good. Okay, so we'll take questions as long as we can.
Okay.
And then I think Richie sent his testimony electronically in
Okay.
case people want to, that was my sense just from the email that he sent it. I don't know
Yeah.
if you heard anything differently.
I haven't heard anything.
Okay, okay. Senator Pennell.
I just have a problem with saying it's illegal for you to do something, but if you do it, there's no legal consequence. I think that's a very bad message to send to you. And you're saying kids think they're gonna, it's a $25 fine. That's not the cost of a vape. I mean, is there a study that says, I mean, is there something that documents that says that a $25 fine, which has been enforced 12 times since 2014, or 14 times since 2012, but not very often, that's stopping kids from getting counseling? I mean, I've got to have a really heavy fact-based thing. I come from health and welfare, we like facts, evidence-based, that a large number of kids aren't getting help from their school counselor or whoever because a policeman might run in and write them a $25 ticket.
I think there is evidence that shows that kids are not quitting because of penalties like that. We've heard, and it's in my testimony, and I apologize, I just sent it to Scott this morning, so I don't know if you have it in front of you or not. But I think what we've heard is that, yes, the fear of getting punished, whether it's like Dr. Farrisee said, of the suspension of school or the fines or the police officers coming up to them, the student assistance program counselors coming to them, is making them not come forward to get the
They hide
counseling.
it. I mean, they're just gonna hide it.
They're just not coming forward. They don't want to get caught. They don't want to get punished. They don't want to get suspended. And one of the things that we've seen from the industry likes laws like this because they're distracting. They don't work. Having them on the books is sort of a feel good that we think it's going to prevent kids from smoking or vaping, and it's not working. It distracts from more impactful measures that do work. We'll talk about those a little bit. Tobacco program funding, eliminating flavors of tobacco are those. And this kind of law makes the kids the victims, not the industry that has sold them these products illegally, and it pushes them even further. One of the things I want to note is that the tobacco industry spends $15 million every year in just Vermont marketing its products. And we just learned this week that Vermont is second highest in the country in terms of direct mail marketing by the industry. Vermont, second after Mississippi. Why? It's the hook. It's the hook customers. Regarding the question that's come up about what the penalty to youth would be if we remove the fine, and the answer is that they're paying the penalty now, and they truly are, and perhaps worse than any monetary penalty they could have. 26% of our kids are vaping right now. According to our YRBS data, the daily use of e-cigarettes from youth increased from 9% in 2015 to 31% in 2019. That shows addiction. Kids are vaping more often. And as we heard in testimony last week before the Senate Health and Welfare Committee by 2022 CDU graduate Ryan Canty, his friend coughed up blood and continued to vape. That's how addictive this is. Nobody wants to keep doing that. I spoke with Rutland school nurse Justine Franco, who will be testifying actually in a few minutes, I believe, in Senate Health and Welfare. She said that vaping in Rutland is a daily and very big problem at the school. Youth miss class 2 to 3 times a day due to their vaping for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. Now she says students have digestive issues and acid reflux from the stress of it all. And now Tums are flying off the shelves because the vaping problem is so bad. Youth are vaping to relieve anxiety, and they're finding more anxiety is caused by their vaping. As Dr. Farrisee said, they do it all the time. They need it to feel better. Third graders, from this nurse, Justine Franco, are now sharing flavored vape products on the playground. So we have to do more. PUP laws prevent youth from seeking counseling, as we've talked about, or cessation resources for fear of being fined. while the laws don't serve as an effective deterrent to using tobacco, they are serving, unfortunately, as an effective deterrent to youth seeking help to quit. And we need to create an environment instead where students feel comfortable to quit. Though addicted, they're punished even further by prolonging their addiction because they're afraid to come forward. It's providing youth with an environment where they have a sense of trust or comfort to come forward that will be more helpful to them to quit. As Senator Cummings stated yesterday during our discussion of bill, police in her district aren't enforcing giving a ticket because they want to build relationships with youth. We heard the same message last week in testimony from the Student Assistance Program counselor at CVU, Matt Minier. He noted that the hassle of coming forward is too much for many youth, and they choose instead to keep vaping. Rutland cessation specialist Sarah Cosgrove said, quote, "When we do education in schools, we try to create an environment where open conversations are important. They learn from this the full picture of what the student is going through and where they're receiving their vape products, for instance."
So we, wanted to prioritize Dr. Farrisee just, with her limited time. I think Senator Clarkson had a question, and then we're probably gonna have to wrap up, and this is, I think this
Could
is
I
very
ask that
helpful.
you share the
Yeah.
study that says that the $25 fine is preventing kids from coming forward? Because that has nothing to do with school suspensions for vaping.
Okay.
That's,
I don't know if I have one specifically to
Right.
Vermont's fine, but
I mean,
I think a
I
study that says fines and punitive measures,
so,
would that be satisfactory? I don't know that there's a study just on our $25 fine, it's only been used 12 times, so it would have to be a.
yeah, anything that's documented,
yes.
but we are not. If they're getting expelled from school, it's because they're breaking the law. So my argument is if there's no penalty and you can break the law and the 20, then just get rid of the law. That's what we did with cannabis. We couldn't enforce it.
Well,
But
this is getting rid of
Yeah.
the laws that applies to the youth purchaser. And I think,
But
what
not to
I'm hearing
the
too
sell.
is, health and welfare is looking deeply at the health side of policy change. And they've brought this to us
Yes.
as the sort of cleanup on how we move in the direction that is less punitive and more supportive, that supports their work. That's the sense I'm getting from this coming from Senator Lyon and the
Yeah.
healthcare community.
I just wanted to answer that, answer the question for Senator Clarkson, but I just wanted to point out one last thing in my testimony, because Senator Cummings, I think you asked about this the other day about the clerk being penalized.
Yeah.
We agree, we don't like that,
Mhm.
it should be the retailer, but this legislation, line 10 on page 4 of S19 actually places the fine solely on the retailer. I think the way it was worded before was the fine would be on the person, and the person can be the place of business and employee. So it cleaned it up to say it was just the retailer. And
is
we
that
totally
the owner of
support
the
that.
store or the 16-year-old clerk who took a fake ID for a 20-year-old purchaser? What we heard yesterday is there's a $25 fine if you buy it. You're allowed to sell if you're 16, and there's a $100 fine for selling. There seems to be some inequity here.
They both get fined now, I believe, the clerk and
Yeah.
retailer. The S19 would fine just the retailer, so I interpret that to mean the owner of the store, not the clerk. And DLL has said that they feel the best approach is to do education, to make sure that the laws.
Then we should get rid of the law that says it's illegal.
Senator Clarkson.
That's
So Tina, it's good to see you. If we get rid of this law, I want to know what we're going to do positively to reduce this huge risk and to educate our young people. And I'm just curious what your plan is on an education front. You have a high-powered group of people and groups that you're affiliated with who have deep pockets. What is our campaign to get to address this with kids where they are on Instagram, on TikTok? What are we doing? What's your plan to address what Dr. Farrisee really encouraged us all to do?
And I would say in 2 minutes. 'cause
Yeah,
we do have
I
to switch to the
My plan is to get the legislature to support my plan. And so the tobacco program is incredibly effective. It's reduced youth smoking when the program started was 33%. They got it down to 7%. So it's a great program. But unfortunately, as we heard, vaping is 26%.
Yeah.
The tobacco program is trying to do a whole lot with a little bit of money. We get $26 million in master settlement funds every year. Only about 2 million of those actually goes to the program. We would like to increase funding for the program. We know that right now.
And the other 24 million goes to the state.
Yeah, it goes, I think it goes to the general fund.
Sitting in an administrative.
Yeah, it probably funds largely Medicaid.
Right.
But we would like more funding to go to the program. It would solve some of the things that Dr. Pharisee talked about, Senator Clarkson asked about. The way to market to kids is the way they're comfortable with, and that's social media, and that costs money, and that those costs don't go down. And the health department has had basically the same pot of money to try to solve this huge epidemic on top of some really tough populations of smokers, getting those down. So that's part of it. And the second kind of a 1-2 punch would be to pass the flavor bill, because kids aren't picking up because they're like, cool, it tastes like tobacco. They're doing it because it tastes like bubble gum or unicorn, pita, I've heard about all these crazy flavors are very enticing. And if we eliminate those at the same time, we try to change norms with media through the tobacco program, that's how to do it.
Yeah. Much appreciated. I like
Thank
your
you.
plan. Thank you. And we know
Yeah.
most of it lives in Senate Health and Welfare, and this is the piece that was brought to us by the chair.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Thank you. Joyce, thanks Jill for getting Dr. Ferris. It's just really helpful. So Joyce, apologies. We have pushed back the treasure, but we do need a break. So we have 20 minutes, if that's okay. I certainly need a break.
Okay, I have another commitment at 10:30.
Yeah, so 20 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
Oh, I have 10.
Okay.
Great,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shall I?
Thanks for your
start?
patience. Yes,
Okay.
we're still live.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Joyce Manchester from the Joint Fiscal Office.
No, I'm Wendy Hurst.
Oh, okay.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. And I know everyone else, so that's good. Yes, and Senator Blackson, hello. Okay, so I was asked to talk somewhat about the minimum wage and benefits cliff study committee report. So I should tell you, this was done. The report came out in December of 2017. So that's been a while.
Yep.
5 and something years. So at the time, we were seriously, or you, the legislature, was seriously considering raising the minimum wage. You asked the study committee.
Summer study committee.
This is it.
Mr. Rodkin chaired it.
Exactly, here
That's
you
where
are,
this
right
came
on
from.
my list, exactly. And this is about half of the report. It was a 200-page report.
It was a long summer study committee too.
There was a lot of work, yes, a lot of work went into it. And we were looking not only at the history of the minimum wage in Vermont and how we might think about the minimum wage going forward, but we were also thinking in particular about how raising the minimum wage would affect all of the benefits cliffs that had been discussed previously. So a lot of that work was done by Damian Leonard in looking at what other states are doing and so forth, and also by Deb Wrighton, who does all of the benefits cliff work. Now, Deb Wrighton is in a special position because she has access to a lot of administrative data that we in the Joint Fiscal Office do not have. Deb Wrighton is trying to retire. She's trying to scale back the amount of work that she does. So I'm not sure if she's available to do more work. And at this point, we have not made the connection to pass along all of her knowledge to someone at JFO. We just haven't had the time to do that. And we do not have access to the data that she was able to get. So when we say benefits cliff, it sounds like, okay, there's one thing that you have to figure out. No, it's every program and every eligibility criteria and what income level and so forth. And what happens if you earn $1 more? Do you lose benefits at what rate and so forth? So it's a tremendous amount of work.
So just to be clear, she's done some of that work in the past.
In the
The data is old,
Yes,
but it exists and she would still be the only one who could present it, or it could be presented
So,
by you or something.
we would, if you wanted a presentation on the benefits list, I would be happy to talk to Deb and find out if she would prefer to present it herself,
Okay.
or if she would like to ask somebody at JFO to do that
Okay.
for her.
Okay.
We understand at a high level what's going on. We don't have the in-depth
Sure.
understanding.
Senator Clarkson had a question. Sure.
Hi, Joyce. Don't worry. You can turn your back on me. I won't be offended.
She pretends she's there.
That study was, that work was great, Anne, and I applaud the work you did on it. But I was hoping you would actually be addressing more current data, because we must have more current data. You're about to present the basic needs stuff. And I think if we more fundamentally go to what the minimum wage is designed to do in the first place in the 30s, it was designed to be a minimum wage that met the minimum needs of a household income. You know, what if the minimum needs were for a person to live and survive with any kind of dignity. So to me, that's the question. I have a real problem looking at how we keep people on public assistance when we're trying to get them off public assistance, standing financially on their 2 feet with dignity and earning enough to live. So to me, this is about liberating them from being dependent on public assistance, which is, so it's this sort of insidious challenge that we face, you know, catering to public assistance, you know, and making sure we don't, you know, people fall off the benefits cliff, but also having people earn enough so they're not needing public assistance. I mean, to me, this is one of our biggest challenges. So I would love to have updated report from JFO about what minimum needs are. What is our livable wage need now in Vermont? I know some of it is based on area, but you have all this work. And so that is what I'm more interested in right now for us to look at.
Can I just- Yeah, thank you, Senator Clarkson. And there's also the livable wage that is calculated by at least, or used by the housing agencies. So
Right,
I
exactly.
think considers it,
Yeah.
That
considers,
hasn't been updated.
right, well, I don't know, but,
It has been. Well,
But Joyce
well,
does.
I'm just saying to look at both
Yeah.
of those, please.
So,
Yes,
so I'm just,
exactly.
Joyce, should we be telling you what information we need
Yes,
right now? Okay, so
absolutely.
you're coming in to say, you know, tell me what you want to
Absolutely.
see.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
so we can compare the three. That is true. It's good to have that primer. I would just add, you know, in the past, we tried to look at demographics of who makes minimum wage, and see how updated those are. You know, right now, we've asked Department of Labor for this too, so you can defer, but who is making less than $15 an hour? I mean, anecdotally, people keep saying, who's making less than $15 an hour? That's, you know, that's absurd, but somebody is, you know, so we just want to get a better sense of who's below $15 an hour right now.
Right.
And as you look at the study that we have in here, you don't have to answer this right now, but you know, is there any information we currently have that would help capture people who don't make minimum wage? How many people does that impact in Vermont? What does that look like? What are the sort of economic pros and cons of the categories of people who don't make minimum wage? Domestic service, agriculture, you know, public supported nonprofit. I mean, like, you know, I think Senator Cummings made this point of we're the perpetrators sometimes. We're paying people very little in designated agencies potentially, and we may be impacting the state by increasing to $15 an hour, but what are we, who is most impacted that might be receiving public dollars? Senator Clarkson.
So we would impact the state enormously if people earned enough so that they didn't need public assistance. That is quite honestly where we would really impact so many families and the state, everything from the state purse to families and children and our quality of life. I mean, so I think that's, that's the biggest impact we could have is if every Vermonter was earning enough so that they didn't need public assistance.
Is there any way you want to further define public assistance so that Joyce can?
Well, I mean, when we talk about the benefits, Cliff, we're talking about all the assistance that people need because they're low income.
The big one is childcare.
Right, I was gonna say like childcare, healthcare,
So it's everything from Joyce knows better than we. It's the big four, right? It's the 3 squares, childcare,
healthcare.
healthcare, Medicaid, so I think, I think what we all want, at least ideally, is people earning enough or earning enough to be financially independent and standing on their own 2 feet. And I think at least that would be my hope for Vermonters.
Mm-hmm. Scott, do we have corrections this week or are we looking at the week of the 14th and they got back to us?
They're looking for the answers. They haven't gotten back to us yet, and I can schedule them for 14th if you'd like.
Okay.
Right now, they're still just looking.
So it looks like the week we come back, Joyce hopefully will also have corrections come in and say how much people in prison are being paid. Department of Labor does not keep that information. So I'm just letting you know, because that's going to be a JFO question of between corrections telling us how much it would take to pay people a potential minimum wage in prison. Obviously that's a study, but just wanting, to understand the impact of that discussion.
There's a fair amount of data on that, comparative data about wage rates paid to prisoners in all states in the United States.
Okay.
That is easily available.
It's like NCSL kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, so it'd be great to get that to them,
Mhm.
right? I'm just looking at that study real quickly, and there's some great information. Obviously, it stops in 2017 or 16, but if it's possible, even if you can't do all the numbers in between, but just update it for today, because it's just been a huge change.
That's my chart.
I'm sorry?
That is my chart.
I love it. I love it. I love all these,
Okay,
but if there's a way to update it for
Right.
real.
So
current, I should
Did you
say.
not want to share these right now, Joyce?
Oh, no, it's fine to share.
Oh,
I just
you
want
can
to,
maybe send it to Scott so we.
Oh, no, I got this from our website.
This is a
This
public
is-
on our
this-
website.
this
Oh,
is-
great,
This is
okay.
the report.
this is the report.
Okay,
It's publicly available.
and it's now on our website under this topic.
It's 200 pages plus.
It's 200
Got it,
pages.
got it, got
Well,
it.
just look at the first 5 pages. And just imagine where the lines would be, because so much has changed since COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is different. All of our assumptions, or I shouldn't say all, many of our assumptions are different. So just having as much as you can update these, I think that would be very helpful,
Okay,
because we have a new
Yeah.
reality, especially in wages.
right.
Okay, I need to set expectations.
Okay.
Yes.
Unfortunately. So at the moment, I'm heavily involved in early childhood education, in paid family leave, in clean heat standard, and sort of reviewing analytical work in our office.
Yeah.
So my opportunity to do a lot of data updating and so forth is very limited, unfortunately. I can work away at this and see how much I can get done, but what is your timeline on looking at this?
So we're looking at a number of bills and seeing which have where we have the information we need to make crossover on March 17th. It's, as 3 of us who are returning know, we did pass this out of committee last year. So, we still are trying to move this one, but it's just, wondering what information you think we can get the week after town meeting would be helpful to.
Sure, wow,
I would say even one of these charts, not even like, I think not even necessarily doing the numbers in between, but just doing 2022 or whatever the most recent that you have, or 2021.
you show me the table number for that one. Figure 2.
Do you want to describe to the committee?
It's, well, I'm just obviously doing this on the fly,
Yeah,
but like this one, to me, is very helpful because it shows the history.
so it says since 1979, wages have been flat or falling for low and middle wage workers, and what's the?
And this is in Vermont, I believe. It looks like it is. I mean, obviously, national stuff isn't what we need.
Actually, I have it.
Is it is it something by year? What?
Yeah, the axis, the X is year.
Mhm.
So it would be, what I suspect has happened is the middle wage has gotten higher relative.
Okay, so this is not my chart. This comes from the Economic Policy Institute and it's current population survey data, so it's nationwide.
Okay, so let's do
So
a
there's no,
Vermont.
it's not a Vermont.
No, Vermont.
So figure 4 is Vermont,
Yes.
Vermont wage distribution and the Vermont minimum
Okay,
wage.
Scott put it up on the screen, which I think is helpful. for
Oh,
those
great,
great.
watching at home.
Thank you, Scott.
So
And that again is not Vermont. That's,
It says,
it says, we're looking at figure 4.
so I'm looking at CPS. Maybe he pulled,
oh,
boy.
I think, no, that's a different one than what we're looking at.
You want to look
That's-
behind,
Figure 3 on ours.
Yeah.
Which is great, but figure
Which
4
one?
is
Oh, so that is my chart. Figure
Okay.
4 is my J. Okay, yes, so that comes from OES data, yep, and I imagine the most recent we can get is 2021
okay,
on occupational employment survey.
okay, that would be really helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, we know that I think end of March is when this information gets updated, but it is helpful, I think, to go to 2021 and see.
It's a big change.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that anything we're looking at, even in 2021, is applicable today.
Yeah.
I realize it's the best data we can
Right.
have, but
Right, it's gonna be
we're in
outdated.
a different reality.
Absolutely.
And I would be very hesitant to make a great many decisions based on 2021 data as a trend.
Mhm.
but
I guess the
I would
question
say
for-
it's more relevant than 2016.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Well, I think
And from,
you're right, Randy. I mean, with the inflation, the hit to both families and to employers is that has changed. But that means that the cost of living, you know, the minimum amount you need to live is rising and at a more rapid rate than any of us would like. So I think that's what we're trying to address here is how can we help Vermonters earn more to meet some of these challenges.
Well, I think though we also at the same time have to be mindful of where the money will come from to do that and the effect on the economy of the changes necessary to do what you want to do.
Well,
so we do have other witnesses coming in to speak to that. I don't know,
There are a lot
Joyce, if
of
there's
moving
something
parts.
Oh,
that he would bring forward. in that.
So I'm just thinking that if you're really serious about not needing public assistance, for example, in the child care program in CCFAP, currently subsidies go up to 350% of the federal poverty level,
Mhm.
which for a family of 3 is more than $80,000.
Right.
So, and they're talking about moving that threshold for income up to 400 or 450%.
Mhm.
So that would be what, $105,000 at 450%. So if you're talking about setting a minimum wage to allow a 40-hour per week job to provide $105,000 a week,
Obviously, I don't think we're talking about that, Joyce. I think we're talking about, I mean, that is an extended benefit. There are some, I think that the income-based ones that are probably more applicable are not that higher end, but the more basic ones that we could look at. 3 Squares, LIHEAP. I mean, there are a bunch of other ones that we could be looking at. I mean, I think
yeah, see,
obviously
go
we're
ahead.
not going to be able to do that.
I'm looking at figure 7 on page 15, which was one of Deb Brighton's benefit cliffs charts. And you can see it's really the childcare subsidy that's pushing that hill upward. But there are a number of programs here what's the pink?
The
the
childcare was
dependent-
the biggest issue that came up in that minimum wage study committee.
Right,
You can see it.
yeah,
The raise in minimum wage did not offset the benefit to the childcare that you had. And so, and that was any raise.
Mhm.
That's one of the reasons we've gone to the earned income tax credit, because it doesn't affect this.
okay,
That's really interesting. That's a very
Right.
interesting chart.
That is Deb Brighton's work.
Okay,
Yeah,
she
she's-
can't
she's-
retire.
No, exactly.
No.
It just takes a story that
Sadly,
brought it
she
to us
can't.
that you can't, people that were refusing to advance
Mhm.
because the initial cost
Mhm.
was more than the gain. And
Right. So the alternative, I mean, Joyce, this isn't fully, but I mean, this relates to in terms of the time crunches. We can wait to get the basic needs study and keep talking about minimum wage and attach it to,
So the basic
the
needs
basic
study
needs
is
study.
available. It's out on the website. It's
sorry,
on-
this is a task force that is a
Oh,
bill
oh,
coming
oh,
to
oh.
us. I'm not sure if you've seen that work. There's a House bill on, on looking at, the basic needs budget in relation to
Oh,
the
yes,
benefit
I
list.
know, yes, I
You
know
know that
exactly
one?
what
Okay.
that
that's what came up this summer with joint fiscal.
is. Yes,
Right.
we've been pushing for this, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Currently, the basic needs budget is a mishmash of low-income expenditures,
Mhm.
middle-income expenditures, average. And it would be really helpful for us to know exactly what the legislature wants the basic needs budget to represent.
Right, right.
Right, so.
Which goes kind of the back and forth with Senator Clarkson. And by that time, we, as I understand it, end of March, we'll have more updated information about 2022's wage data. That's what I believe we heard from the Department of Labor.
So maybe they'll have the occupational employment survey for 2022 by the end of March. Maybe.
I'm not remembering it.
I can
It was like getting.
They're gonna
the
have
name-
something at the end of March.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get the name wrong, what it is, but it sounded like this is
Yeah,
a bill where they would have a lot more
yeah, there's
information.
it was the new wage
Right,
report.
right. So we do have a couple more witnesses before crossover on, oh, sorry, I was just saying before crossover on minimum wage, but we might also keep having that discussion past crossover and wait for the basic needs task force study to come over and keep the conversation going that way and not push a vote before crossover.
Because COVID just threw everything up in the air. When we did this, the task force, the study, we were looking at, since the 90s, a long range without major interruption. We weren't looking at supply chain issues. We weren't looking at inflation. We haven't seen anything like this since the oil embargo in the 70s. Threw everything into double-digit inflation. I want to make sure.
Yeah, I hear that.
I
We
mean,
will
I know
enforce the
the
conversation.
economists have said to the money chairs, the
Mhm,
one place the market works is wages,
mhm,
that it's supply and demand, and the wages are going up.
mhm.
Hopefully, the supply chain stuff and inflation will
Right,
level.
right.
But I'm not sure that monkeying during a time of turmoil might not cause more harm than good.
Well, it's an important topic for this committee regardless
It
of if we
is.
decide to do something. So Joyce, hopefully that gives you a little more time, like we'll look at the end of March to revisit this discussion.
Okay.
So if you could help us answer some of those questions we mentioned.
Sure.
And we can have an iterative conversation, so it's not you feeling like, I don't know what
Yeah.
you're asking for. You asking for everyone to make $105,000. So Senator Clarkson, and then we'll take a break until 10:45.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. I think that may be a good strategy. I think that we will have Matt's updated data we could, and we will have had the benefit of the childcare bill making some progress and the paid family leave having made some progress. So I think those things will be very helpful in this discussion because they're all pressures on this. And the basic needs budget may be a good vehicle if we want to do something about the minimum wage.
Great. Thank you, Joyce. We know, I mean, I actually didn't know the extent to which you're both in all of the, I knew about childcare and paid family leave, but S5 adds a whole nother dimension. So we'll try to give you some space and not rush this conversation and hopefully get Deb right. It's good thinking. We'll try to work with you to see what's possible.
So should I contact her at this point?
I think that would be great. Does that cost us money too? Like when we get come to that?
Yes, she's under contract to Jeff.
Okay, so
She's not an employee.
let's have that conversation offline to make sure.
Okay.
Whoever needs to, know that we are looking for an expenditure to have this. I do think it's important information to update, so I don't want that to be the limiting factor, but we certainly want to know what we're asking and how much that will cost. Thanks so much, Joyce. We're going to go on a break till 10:45 and then have the treasurer in the witness chair.